welcome back, everybody. I hope you all had great discussions. Now we invite any participants watching from home, as well as our discussion groups, to ask questions. And a reminder, anyone can submit a question using the Questions tab on the webinar control panel. So during the break, we already received the first few questions, and I'm going to start with our first question. Came in from Winston, for Winston. It's from Kevin in Regina, and he's asking, how do you understand what the audience would find meaningful for that first experience?
I think it's a great question. You know, I still think too many brands talk to themselves, and you know, I'm talking about ideas and firsts, but you have to know your customer and very intimately, you know, and we do a ton of research, and both for that Volkswagen project, there was a long period, you know, 4 weeks of research, 5 weeks, which is not that long really, but we spent a lot of time with you know, customers and in the field. You know, a lot of ad agencies still rely on focus groups. I think they're pretty horrible. They're contrived. You don't really get real data. I think you have to get out into the field. You have to use data. You know, we look for insights all over the place, and really meaningfulness is really about really having that empathy. That word came up a couple times. You know, you have to have empathy with your audience and your customer to be able to identify what's meaningful for them.
Okay, excellent. Toria, Caroline, would you like to also sort of speak to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like doing research about actual users versus focus groups, where I think it's just the odds are stacked against you. People are sort of brought into the room to give you feedback, and of course they're gonna jump on any opportunity to say something to feel important. But talking to real users in some way, shape, or form is definitely the way to get down into what people are looking for, and putting yourself in their shoes. I feel like so many companies focus so much on what they want to say, and you know, there is a sliver of overlap between what a company wants to say and what a user wants to hear, but it's definitely not as much as the company wishes it were. But I think if they can wrap their heads around putting themselves in the place of their users, they'd ultimately be more successful. It's more challenging politically to forge that path, but that's really the way to have the most success and the most traction.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm incredibly biased in the sense that I was employed as a user researcher at IBM Watson. So I obviously think user research is something everyone should engage with, because that was my job. But before Watson, I worked in advertising. I worked at RGA briefly as an intern for the mobile social platforms under Richard Ting, as well as the prototype studio under Mark Mella. And then from there, I went to Spies and Assassins, where I worked with Mike Dory. And I think, like, user research is so incredibly important, but oftentimes it depends upon budget and how much time you have. Like, if a client needs something delivered immediately, sometimes the best things you can do is like go online and do a form of digital ethnography on social media. You can see what people are saying about other products and like the iTunes Store or the Android Play Store, Google Play. It depends upon like what your product is. I ended up doing some experiential design, and I was lucky that I had a background in doing set design for theater, and I had done costume design in high school, and I already knew a lot about like how people would interact with things, like where your line of sight would cross, having also studied photography and cinema. But I think like one of the most important things you can do is user research. And oftentimes what I did at Watson was just watch how people use our products. And our products are very different than most standard products because it's software capabilities and APIs, and we were then designing the product design on top of it. But one thing that like we had to figure out was, are we using the right kind of data? Are we creating the right kinds of interfaces for this machine learning capability? And then from there, like, can even people inside of Watson understand like why we chose the word choices? Like, does our UI make sense? Does our UI make sense in the way in which we're using the right language? What kind of language are we using? What kind of person did we design for? So at Watson, we spent a lot of time building out a persona library that was based on like hundreds and hundreds of hours of user interviews. And so we would turn to that instead if we had a short deadline and a tight turnaround to be like, well, we don't have time to talk to a lot of users, but let's go based off this in-depth library we have. And I think that's the best thing to do, because otherwise you can end up in a scenario where you're designing for the people around you, which may not be your customer base and may not be your consumer at all. And you may overlook so many things about that particular consumer.
Yeah, I mean, there's an amazing, maybe you've seen this, but Google did this project called Unskippable Labs, and this was really geared at mobile content. And they worked with Mountain Dew, and they actually took one commercial, and they used the internet essentially as a focus group, which is, test and learn, which I'm a big believer in. And what they did is they used a traditional ad with the product and very traditional story arc, and then they did one with the product up front in the beginning, because most people skip ads, right, or avoid them completely. And then the third one was like 1 minute and 33 seconds with no narrative. It was super weird, and that's the one that most people that had the highest view through. Again, to your point, Toria, it wasn't feature overloaded, which is like kind of the company is talking to themselves. And it also had the highest brand recall. People don't remember the ad, like the ad as much, but they remembered the brand. And I think that's just a great, if people are interested, it's called Unskippable Labs, but I think it's a great example of, really designing for the actual behavior and the context, and being hyper aware of that. I think, Carolyn, you also brought up, you made me think of something, I love digital ethnography too. Mindswarm is a tool we've used. There's lots of great ways to get data, and it doesn't have to take, thousands and thousands of dollars.
Excellent, thanks guys. Our next question is from Subplot. What's the future of the relationship between web copy and design? That's for all three of you.
I'll start with that. I feel like one of the things we talk about here a lot is sort of that back-end efficiencies that companies want, and I talked about this a little bit in my presentation, but when you're talking about a huge company, some of our clients like Chevron or Chipotle, we do stuff for them. There's a lot of content coming in from the back end, and it's presented in a bunch of different ways. How can we make the front end experience of that not feel just generic? We use a lot of modular pieces of content that can be reused across platforms, but that is something that I think about a lot. It just feels like everything has become so gridded and modular. Is there going to be a next big kind of evolution of web design that takes it from there and kind of changes it, or our device is going to go away entirely and we just kind of go to something else completely non-device? I'm not really sure, but I feel like still having that story and idea that Winston has talked about is going to be always critical in getting people to pay attention to your message, no matter what platform.
Caroline, you're going to have more thoughts on this given your Watson-ness. But, one thing that we found during building Talkabot was the exchange between copywriting and technology. And, I think Silicon Valley, there was an article about poets being the new hot job, right? And, AI can do a lot, but still charisma, wit, personality is super important. Another creative director asked me if he was going to be out of a job, and I'm like, well, you're funny, so you're good for now. I think there's a real, so much potential if you're a great writer. Forget about web, but just truly trying to write for these new type of interfaces that are not anything we've seen before, but that require a deep, kind of imagination and bringing personality to technology. I think that makes me want to go back and, become a writer. So I don't know that the design, I think it's just, if I've been in the web a long time and we've seen the creative team evolve, right? And we've seen the advertising team go from art and copy to the introduction of code and UX and producers in there as well. I think this is going to be It's going to be a confusing time, and I don't know if people saw, but we were tweeting back and forth. I think there's going to be a whole lot of crazy titles in the AI economy, but writing to me is one that's, really exciting in terms of potential.
Yeah, I mean, like I actually know the people behind Cortana. We all hang out. um, and they have backgrounds in writing. Like there's been a lot of, I think, a lot of press on like especially Cortana's team of hiring screenwriters. I think one of the reasons I was like selected at Watson was I had like a multidisciplinary background. But a lot of it is like Cortana, for example, is a brand. Like Watson is not a lot like Cortana. It's not AI on a phone. It's a suite of very in-depth products. So we've never had to worry about, what does Watson sound like? Because Watson can sound like a lot of different things. But with something like Cortana and Siri, it's like, well, what is the voice of this entity that can talk back to you? Like what is Microsoft's look and feel? Like when I was at RGA, I was working with the MasterCard team, and when you're working on social, like you have a persona you're working with, and ours was called Rebecca, and she was a mom of 3, and like that was like she was really young and hip, and that was like the voice we were aiming for MasterCard, and that's like the tone we were writing in, the way we would write press, the way we would write different tweets. If you can write really well, and you can understand like tone and voice and look and feel, and from a branding perspective, like even with AI, like that will totally fit in because you want the AI to sound like sort of like a human, to sort of say things that can be funny and understand humor. And right now we're having a hard time like programming sarcasm, but like if you can still write jokes, like there'll still be a place for you. I mean, if we go back to Tay, for example, one of the reasons Tay failed is that there wasn't a lot of infrastructural programming work done to like think about harassment. That's why Tay failed. Tay didn't fail due to like bad ideas. It failed because it was a really fantastic experiment that wasn't actually really designed to be released to the public, and it was something that like the team was sort of pushed to release. But it was designed based off a corpus of what a teen girl sounded like. And if you interacted with it from like just the standpoint of, do these sentences sound like something a teen girl would say if you took out like the racism? Like yes, it is. Like they figured out like the lexical structure of how a teen would talk. Now the downside to it was there wasn't any kind of catch-all around like, okay, what happens if someone uses the N-word with the bot? What happens if someone uses abortion? And I know this because I tested it when it was launched. I immediately went and kicked the tires. And I asked it questions about like who's Eric Garner? Some of the questions were really nuanced that were specifically designed to tackle like these really heavy topics. And some of them weren't. Like things like abortion weren't outlined very well at all. And so you kind of got this really weird mishmash of maybe what it could be or could not be, because who knows where the data corpus came from. And then that's another thing. Like when you're designing for AI in particular, where is your data coming from? So if you're training a bot, like for Cortana or Siri, all those responses are written by someone. They have to be vetted. They have to go through compliance law. They have to go through like a series of executives that have to sign off on it. It's not like creating on the fly the answers. The difference with Tay is that the answers were not pre-written. They're being created based off of interaction, which means you're going to get weird things thrown together. If you look at Watson on Jeopardy, there's this one question people bring up frequently that Watson failed, which was about an airport. And it was about an airport, and it named one, I think, in Canada. It was about an American airport. But if you looked at it, like, and you broke down why it picked it, it was, like, on a very technical level correct, because it was pulling based off, like, locational data. It was just, like, the airport they picked was also, like, another airport in another city that was also, like, a city that's used, I think, in between, like, Canada and the United States. Like, I think it's something to do with London. And those are, like, little things, because it's, like, bots are incredibly literal. So if you start to then break down like all of this construct, like you can see like right now we're not in a place where a bot can just write itself. It can't just write these answers up and being right. They still have to be guided by someone. Someone still has to vet them. Like bots cannot just be unleashed into the world. They take a lot of training. So for a really long time, longer than I think that anyone can start to conceptualize, we're going to need writers of bots to actually write out responses that are like allowed from a branding standpoint, that can be vetted, that can be looked at, that can fit the tone, the voice.
Yeah.
the look and feel of like what a customer's brand will be. Like
That's why I think it's such an amazing branding opportunity,
yeah.
right? You know, like I have Alexa right next to me, and I like it, but I want to throw this out. Someone make Alexa fun.
I mean, part of
I want to
the
have more
problem,
fun with Alexa.
well, part of the problem is that we either have to accept that like bots right now will not sound that great if they're coming up with their own answers because they're going to be clunky. Or we can take the pre-written funny results, and sometimes they're funny, right? And sometimes like Siri is really, really funny. And sometimes Siri, it's like, that is not the answer I wanted you to say. And the answers will sound really similar because there's only so many responses Siri has. Like the corpus is really low. It's never getting bigger the more you interact with it, you know?
Well,
So
and
go writers, go.
to go back a little bit to that conversation that was happening on Twitter a little bit, is people were sort of saying that, oh, the title of a voice interaction designer is a writer, and to some degree that's true, but I mean I think Caroline's answer kind of shows how complicated it can be. I know some of the people that wrote some of that stuff for Siri, and my kid, like whenever he gets my phone, he's always asking Siri, trying to find those kind of hidden gems and Easter eggs. And like Caroline was saying, that's not totally there yet with right. The bots that don't have that power behind it, or that like tunnel into it or pipe into it. So, but I also think you're right, Winston, that it is a great opportunity, and that in a sea of generic stuff, the thing that has personality will stand out.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is like the early days of the web, you know, where the rules they haven't been this unwritten for me in a long time, and that's where I love to be. So you're right, it's even UX has to reinvent itself. Writing has to reinvent itself. Programming, engineers do. I mean, my old company worked in this thing, Subservient Chicken, which essentially was crude AI. It was just manually coded. And what I love about it now, I mean, right, is that a lot of that engineering is you don't have to do it. It really comes down to the content and that tone of voice and the creativity of the engagement. It's just the burden shifts.
And I could just say, as a writer at a design agency, I'm super excited that having this conversation. Go writers!
Well, it's also one of the things that's really fascinating too, because it's like I've noticed I call myself like a brutalist UX designer. Like I'm not a pretty UX designer. If you're hiring me for graphic design, you've hired the wrong person. I'm not good at that. I'm not great at sketching. But like I understand a lot about machine learning because it's like what I'm really into, and I understand a lot about certain things. But we're sort of entering this time period where it's like it's not necessarily, you're not a unicorn if you can understand code, but you don't need to write it, but you can understand what it means to design for machine learning, which means like you're having to think about wireframes that like can be constantly evolving and shifting. And so what does that look like? And that's like part of what I'm spending the next year exploring at BuzzFeed and Eyebeam is that, like, how do you make wireframes that are shifting constantly based off the data you're putting into it? How do you create interfaces that allow for a lot of user interaction, because they're going to have to be part data scientists when they're dealing with these things. But the reason I bring it up, though, is it's like especially when it comes to thinking about all the responses that someone could have if you're writing for a bot, you also have to think about, like, what is the purpose of the bot? So, like, Siri is hard to write for, but is it harder or easier to write for a pizza ordering bot? Is it harder or easier to write for a shop bot, right? If you're writing for like J.Crew, like, who is that? J.Crew I picked really specifically because I like it, but also they have a very highly specific brand, and like their CEO, Jenna Lyons, is like a massive part of that brand, right? And she has a very specific style, and so then they've done a good job of highlighting actual stylists. So like if you are mimicking a person or mimicking a certain tone of voice, you also have a lot of like data to pull from when it comes to something like J.Crew, because they put that in their catalogs, right? So then all of a sudden it's like, well, when do you insert a joke? Well, if someone's trying to order something and they're asking you a question about sizing, that's probably not a good time for that. But if someone's trying to order something and they respond with like, yeah, you have this in my size, you can be like, yeah, get a girlfriend or something along those lines. But it's figuring out, like, as a person, what is the line you walk between, like, customer service and creating an enjoyable experience. And bots can be really invasive unless people need them. And so right now we're kind of in this spot where it's like, well, what is the need? And if the need is to answer a series of questions that are really frustrating, then it's to think about, like, how do you make this an extension of customer service, but also can you solve the problem faster? If you can't solve the problem faster, then what can you do that a human can't do? And how do you sort of create that kind of empathy when you're writing? And that's something that only a human can come up with.
The other thing that you both touched on, though, is like ethics too, right?
Yeah.
Because that, I mean, it goes into that territory as well, you know, because if we're going to have these real conversations that are algorithmic,
Totally.
you know, and people sometimes don't know it on the other end.
But that's also the thing, like when it comes to being an AI specialist designer or a voice interaction designer, it's understanding that, like, things become like a series of choices. If you start here and things branch out, what is the branching? Is it based off the knowledge tree that you built your algorithm on? Do you know what a knowledge tree is? Do you know all the choices someone can make? Do you know what the options are in your hierarchy of your website? Do you know what the actual consumer flow is if someone has a problem? Like, these are all things you have to keep in mind when you're writing, you know. But there's also all things you have to keep in mind, which is where does the software start to fail? Where will the bot trip up? And then how can you use language to, like, band-aid that?
Yeah. Now we'll kind of have to move on. Like, we have a few other questions we'd like to cover. It's a very good discussion though. Now, kind of following up on what you guys were talking about, beyond being a creative director who's funny or a writer who is good at writing jokes, do you have any advice for emerging designers interested in specializing in information design?
Like, what kind of information design? Like, we got to get real specific here.
You pick one, then we'll play from there.
I guess it's like, I was really lucky that I happened to be really interested in bots and empathy, and that, like, I originally applied to Eyebeam to work as a design specialist because I wanted to design tools for Watson. So I was supposed to be designing internal tools from, like, a marketing team for, like, all of Watson to use, and then the design team grabbed me and they were like, what are you interested in? I'm like, well, I'm from Louisiana and I'm really interested in language. Louisiana, we speak two different kinds of languages. There's English, and then there's this, like, oral language called Cajun that's not written and it's, like, dying. So I've always been interested in, like, this idea of the cultural construct of language. And so I was like, I'm really interested in natural language processing, and how do you teach a bot, like, a dying language? And they're like, you're going to go work on natural language processing. That's what you're going to do. But it's being able to, like, look and figure out, like when I was at RGA and I was still in grad school, Mark Mella asked me, like, what I'd rather spend, like, an entire weekend doing if I had to go into work. Did I want to be thinking about, like, the real big picture, or did I want to spend, like, hours figuring out what box led to, like, what new screen? And I'm super neurotic, and I was like, the second one sounds like a lot of fun. But it's figuring that out. Like, what do you want to spend, like, hours and days and weekends and evenings on? And it shouldn't be like, I guess that sounds okay. It should really be like, I actually am incredibly interested in the future of e-commerce, and I'm really curious about, like, e-payments on mobile. And that's what you should do. And that's a whole information system that you can figure out. Maybe you're interested in Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, right? Like, do you find yourself researching it, right, like, you know, before you go to sleep, in the morning, on your coffee breaks? Like, those are the things I think you should be thinking about. That's the best advice I have. It's like, what's the thing that you are kind of obsessed with, because your job may have really long hours, and it may bleed into your weekends, and you should sure as hell be interested in what you're doing.
It's funny because my dad was a professor of decision sciences when I was growing up, and that's an area that was pretty obscure. I spent a lot of time trying to explain what that was to friends, and now I find it funny that a lot of the stuff, and he was also involved in management information systems, and super kind of edge stuff, and and I don't mean cutting edge. At the time, it was not cool in particular. It was in its own way, but whatever. But now I feel like it's so interesting that I sit side by side with people who practice some of those things and user flows through experiences. And just building off what Caroline says, I mean, I feel like it is finding your interest, and as a person who's a writer and a content strategist, figuring out the pathing of users through a narrative or a story or information is again, an emerging area, and something that's so rich and deep that there's kind of no limit to what you can do with it if you go in that area. But as Caroline was saying, it's almost like all of these areas, when you scratch the surface a little bit, there's a whole bunch under each of them. And I feel like that is a new thing that's coming out, that each of these little niches have a lot to offer within them. So finding that area of interest and going deep is a kind of a cool opportunity that people have today.
Yeah, those are great answers. I'll try and keep mine short and different. You know, I've worked with user experience designers for years. I'm kind of I function myself one, but I'm not really. I mean, I love designing products, but maybe it's the thing I have in common is intuition and empathy, and I'm able to put myself in the customer's shoes. I try to as much as I can. The user experience or information architects, is what we used to call them. They've been through a bunch of titles. Experience designers. The ones that I've loved working with most is they get the brutal UX, which I love that. You know, they really understand how to design solutions around very specific problems, and there's real. It's the design is very strong, but they also have ideas, and you know that kind of comes back to my my talk. Is, you know, vision is still very important. You know, you shouldn't, there's a real place for it. And, you know, people I kind of admire most, they use data to guide the choices, but they bring ideas and fresh thinking. And, you know, I've worked with a ton of great designers, and it's the people that can do a little bit of both. You know, there's a spectrum of UX. There's the functional and there's the highly creative. And, you know, I think you want to be able to use all of those different muscles and skills, and particularly as we're at this dawn of this new age, where I think imagination is mandatory, you know, in terms of what the rules are. You know, we're getting into a lot of VR now, like just beginning to, and I agree with, I think Carolyn talked about mobile being the future, you know, at least getting to scale, and I agree with that. You know, I think the headsets we'll still see some challenges in that with them. But, you know, some of my team came up to me like, well, we don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, you know, Jessica was a great example from Google. Well, make it up. You know, like the reality is it is you have to just get out there, experience, explore, and make shit, and test and learn. And again, the rules aren't written. So I think that, you know, be fearless and creative, and realize that you are a designer. This is a creative practice. You're not a banker, and that's what I'd say.
Excellent, thank you. We have time for one more question. We have about 5 minutes left. This next question is from Zlatan from Regina. He's asking, is it backwards to ask consumers what they want? Visionaries develop a solution and implement it, and then we think, how do we ever live without that? So what perspectives can we take to see things from a solution first?
Well, it's that question sort of points to the old Steve Jobs thing about how he was like, I'm not going to ask the consumer what they want, I'm going to show them what they want, basically. And I think that can work. I mean, there's things they can't even imagine. I mean, I think it's hard to imagine all the ways that we'll probably use VR in the future, and it's kind of a incremental kind of march till we figure out exactly how powerful it can be, or it falls by the wayside. But I still think that you know, sort of what Winston was saying about designing VW.com, if you don't get into the mind of the consumer and know more about them, you can't even start to pretend to know what they want. they might not be able to tell you what they want. Like, I want a site that shows me car options this way, but you can find out what they need by talking to them. You can find out what the gaps are and what they wish they had, and go from there.
I think it also depends upon where you're looking. So, for example, on the other side of machine learning, one thing I had done at Watson was we were working on this product called Tone Analyzer, and there's a lot of like specific and inherited lingo in machine learning. So when I say the word confidence, what do you think that means? Probably means something related to how you present yourself in public. But in machine learning, confidence means a totally different things. It means a specific rating of, is a word or is a thing likely to be another thing. And the confidence level of something being accurate is 75, which is close to failure, like from like a grading standpoint. But that's incredibly high. That is super high. You're never going to hit like 90 on something. The reason I say this is that we were showing people like dashboards of like the confidence level of this being angry is 90. And people were like, oh, that means like 90% of this text is confidently angry. And it was like, that is not what we mean at all. And so it's really important to ask people, like, what do you think this means? And then we'd ask, like, I asked a bunch of questions where I always ask them, like, well, how would you articulate this then? Like, how would you explain what you think it's doing? You know, and then sometimes I'd give them a little bit of a breadcrumb of, like, it's kind of doing this thing. So what do you think it's doing then in your own words? And from that, we changed, like, the words we were using to describe the graphs to go to likelihood, because it was the likelihood that something was something. So I think it depends upon where you're working. Like for a lot of product design, I would say like you shouldn't ask people what they want necessarily, because it may not work. But it's never harmful to sort of ask like, how would you imagine this something else, or what is a feature you'd really like to see in this? And it kind of goes back to like when Coca-Cola changed their original recipe to be sweeter, because they were doing like one sip tests and it was more like Pepsi, and then people hated it because one, like a very sweet sip is fine, but an entire like drink, it was way too sweet, right? So sometimes it's like this thing of knowing where your product is. But sometimes, again, on the other side, if you're working in machine learning, it may be that you made something way too technical because you're using like you're using the inherited lingo of what it is. So if you're making something for people that don't have a background what you're making it in, then you have to think like, did I make this for users? Did I make this for like a common user, or did I make it for a very technical user? And that's kind of when you have to sort of ask like, what do you think this is, and how would you describe it? Because those are going to be the people using your product. So I think it's a fine balance, which I feel like is all of my answers. It's a fine balance.
I want to build off that. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know that many visionaries. I mean, they're hard to come by. And you know, but I do know a lot of really creative and curious people. I think we need to reframe the word vision a bit. Building on what Caroline said is, you know, I think great vision is asking a lot of questions. You know, I love that line. It's like ask why 5 times, you know, when you're trying to solve something. And usually there's an idea waiting if you keep digging and digging and digging. And when in terms of vision, I think it's the result of smart question asking and kind of relentless in the pursuit of, you know, an idea. It's, you know, that's where we look for it. You know, it's, again, just going on gut. I believe in going on gut, but, you know, you got to just realize and be okay with not having the answer.
Totally.
Perfect. Thanks to all 3 of you. That was a great presentations and a great discussion. And thanks for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
In conclusion, on behalf of the RGD, I thank everyone for attending tonight. Our next Future by Design event takes place Tuesday, January 31st, when we will discuss the future designer. Details and locations for this event will be posted at rgd.ca. If a free screening is not available in your area, consider becoming a member of RGD to access the webcast from home and take advantage of other benefits exclusive to members of the association. As well, RTD is excited to announce that planning is already well underway for Design Thinkers Vancouver, happening May 30th and 31st next year at the Vancouver Playhouse. Register before December 16th to take advantage of the early bird rates. And for more information, go to our website, rtd.ca/DTVAN, so Design Thinker Vancouver. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.